Thank you very much for joining us again on the Connected Economy podcast. Again, this is a podcast where we're trying to just celebrate African businesses that are building the African internet age. Sponsored by Move Better, you can move money between 42 African countries using the Move Better platform. Thank you to our sponsors. They've really been very kind to us. Today I've got Yonas Maru, a very good friend of mine. He's the CEO of BCS Group and probably most understated connected economy enthusiast on the African continent. And you know, welcome Yonas. But I think one of the things that we were just discussing now around the internet on the continent is people generally don't understand how they get the internet to their phones or into their houses. Maybe just start off with a brief history of how you guys got started. It's been a long journey, but it's a beautiful story. And then let's get into like, okay, so how are you sitting in that value chain? Like, what does BCS do in that value chain?
Okay, all right, excellent. I think to understand our journey, it might provide it a better context and understanding to just describe where we are now.
Yeah.
BCS Group stands for Bandwidth and Cloud Services Group, is a licensed wholesale telecom fiber provider in 7 East and Central African countries. So we provide services in Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, DRC, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and Angola, where we're licensed by the telecom regulators and have fiber infrastructure that we use to provide wholesale fiber services to the mobile operators and internet service providers. We have approximately about 10,000 kilometers of our own fiber across the countries, and we lease about 15,000 other kilometers to from electricity companies and other fiber owners in order to provide seamless connectivity across the countries. In terms of service, what we provide is we give the providers wholesale internet from the submarine cables. We carry circuits from one city to another city or from one country to another country. And then within the cities, we connect their mobile, their towers on fiber. So we connect the fiber from tower to tower. I started the business about 12 years ago. Walked into it almost by an accident.
As most of these things are.
Yes. And it's funny that I was a one-man investment advisor helping companies raise capital. And through a long story short, the company that had subscription rights and the team's undersea cable came to me to raise capital. At the time, this was 2009, all of the East Africa coast was being powered purely by satellite. And this was going to be one of the 2 first submarine cables that was going to arrive, that and Seacom, in summer of 2009. The owners of the business had subscription rights to capacity on the cable, which they got by being one of the consultants that helped develop the design of the cable and so forth for the Kenyan Minister of ICT. But they needed to fund those shares on the same terms as everyone else. So they hired me to raise the capital for it. What was required was only $3 million. Unfortunately, there was only about 3 months left for when the money needed to be paid. And we weren't we weren't able to strike a deal on time, or whoever we struck with just didn't deliver the money according to their commitment. So we went back to the shareholders, and I said, we can point out X, Y, Z in the agreements that define the due date to try to find more time to buy. They said they're no longer interested. Then I said, but they said you can buy the business if you want and make it happen if you like. So I bought the shell company with just the subscription rights, no other assets, for $5,000. And then we said to them, if we're ever able to invest successfully, because the ability to invest had, the time to invest had passed, we would give them another $25,000. So started operationalizing the business, signed our first contract with a startup internet service provider in Uganda called Broadband Company, which is no longer around. That helped prove to the business case, and it helped prove the business case that the submarine cable asset that the business was going to be focused on was going to be a very lucrative business.
Right.
So the contract was there, and we went around and raised the $3 million. The money was actually raised within about 2 to 3 months, so it was done quite quickly. But then and what enabled that really, and I think this is useful to other entrepreneurs, of all the things that you had to have in place. We had a signed contract that was, a $1 million contract, which is quite a lot of revenue when you're only raising $3 million. Which had proved the business case. I had a mentor who I had worked with for about 10 years. That was putting in $500,000 out of that $3 million. So there was already an anchor investor that had skin in the game, and it was putting in a significant portion of the capital. And most importantly, he had other high net worth friends, the end investors. So it basically required all the things to be in place. Then we were able to raise the capital. Unfortunately, it took us another 9 months to actually be able to invest that capital, because the initial time frame to invest in the submarine cable had passed. So went to court, got an injunction to buy us more time. So eventually, in August 2010, we were able to invest in the submarine cable, get the capacity in our shares in that cable, and start operations. We initially started in Uganda because the other team's shareholders were also the big operators in Kenya. So Safaricom was there, Telkom Kenya was there, Jimmy Telecom was there, Wananchi was there, and a few other guys. So the biggest market was with the Uganda operators. Who didn't have access to the same team submarine cable capacity or any submarine cable capacity at the time. So we transmitted, we didn't have our own fiber through Kenya at the time, and we leased from other existing providers to transport the capacity from Mombasa up to Kampala, and we started providing our first service in January 2011.
Wow.
From there, we grew the business to Ethiopia via rehabilitating and doing the cross-border connection between Kenya and Ethiopia. At the time, northern Kenya was completely neglected desert where it took 20 hours and 2 days to go from Isiolo, where really civilization
the road
stopped,
ends in Isiolo,
and then get up to Moyale. In fact, at the time, the people of northern Kenya used to say, I'm going to Kenya when they go down south of Isiolo. So we went there. I would say half the people were naked, and there's a lot of bandits around, so we had to carry a lot of spare tires. We found out that our best security was not guns against them, was actually mira and water, because that's what the bandits up there used to be most interested in. So we used to carry a lot of mira and water, and on the holidays we used to give goats to the tribal elders and all this to be able for our people to be able to go up and down and do the fiber maintenance and provide the service. So we started providing service to Ethiopia, and then started providing service to Rwanda as well, at the Uganda-Rwanda border. For Ethiopia, we were the first providers via Kenya. Ethiopia, being a landlocked country, was getting capacity via Djibouti and Sudan at the time, and was interested in opening the third route in order to get better pricing and better availability of internet service into the country. So by this time we'd been in business for about a year and a half, and the growth was very, very high. And the music and the growth kind of stagnated and stopped, so to speak, due to the road constructions that were going on between Kampala and Uganda and the Rwanda border, as well as from Isiolo to Moyale. So the road contractors basically are under a lot of time pressure to build the road. They don't have any penalties for digging up fiber, so it really affected the availability of service. We were providing both to Rwanda and Ethiopia, and our focus of the business became focused on making sure we are putting in the resources to provide the best service we can, despite the road construction.
So I want to stop you there just for a sec and just say, so in the value chain of bringing internet to my phone or to my home, where does BCS play? And how do we, because people are like, if you're doing all the internet stuff, how come can I call BCS and get them at my home? Or, let's not assume people know.
Yes, understood. Our model is that we are wholesalers. So we only serve the mobile operators and internet
so B2B
service providers, just the same way as, I don't know if you've ever gone into a big shop. I did the other day. I was in South Africa and saw this big shop that was selling a lot of different perfumes and lotions, and there was something my wife and mother had asked me to get for them, and I went in there and said, hey, can I buy this? This is a hard brand to find. And they said, no, we don't sell to end users, we only sell to other retailers. So we play a similar role. So we don't serve end users directly, we serve mobile operators and internet service providers. And in terms of and that's just a business strategy decision for us. They're mainly driven out of the fact that we don't want to compete with our customers. Because our customers are serving you and other businesses and end users directly, and they're buying services from us in a lot of cases in order to provide you with that service. The telecom network is comprised of three basic components. It's almost like a water pipe, a water distribution pipe, where you have the very back end, which is usually called the core. Then you've got the transmission network, which is where we play. And then you've got the distribution or access network to get down to the end user. So in order to provide you with service, you would get with a particular, you have your phone or your Wi-Fi modem in the business. If you are getting a wireless signal, then that phone or Wi-Fi modem is connected to a cell phone tower, that is typically a few kilometers away. And if you pay attention when you're driving around the city, you will see all these telephone towers, right? To give you an example, Safaricom, I think, has something like, I don't have their latest data, but let's say 5 years ago, they had about 500 telecom towers to serve Nairobi. In the city, each tower covers around 5 kilometer radius. If you've got too much traffic within that radius, then you would put up more towers than one. So it connects wirelessly from your phone to that cell phone tower that is serving you. That's called the access network.
Okay.
And that typically happens wirelessly, at least for mobile service providers. For some internet service providers that have fiber to the home or business, that obviously would be on fiber down to your Wi-Fi modem. Then from that cell phone tower, in order to provide you with service, they need to connect that cell phone tower down to their central NOC, where they might distribute the internet service from, right? Or if you're making a phone call, do the switching for voice. When the cell phone towers were first laid out in Africa, and really anywhere in the world, that transmission was happening on wireless radio as well. So you've got the access network for the wireless radio, and then the transmission back to the central network center, which tends to be in the capital city of the country, via wireless radio as well. That was good enough for 2G and 3G service. But once you started getting 4G and up, but even to provide proper 3G service, that transmission, the wireless transmission, started getting bottlenecked. There was just way too much data to provide that. So they started converting the wireless transmission onto fiber transmission from the tower back to the central NOC. So that is the space and the service and the place in the internet ecosystem that we play in. Then from the central network center, in order to give you internet, they either need connectivity to the submarine cables, or in more developed markets to a big data center where other players that have connectivity to the submarine cables can give them internet. Then that internet then is distributed down.
So I think, so when you talk about, so we're talking about the connected economy, we're focused on trying to get our audience a better understanding of, how the growth, a very good example that Professor Monica talked about last episode was saying that there's 57 million phones, smartphones in Kenya, and there's only 40 odd million people. So we're getting to a place where that density that you're talking about, whether it's on 4G, 3G, 4G, or even 5G, is getting quite intense. Therefore, there's going to be need for more fiber, right? And clearly, that's good for your business.
Yes, absolutely, and that's the wave that we are riding on. And it's a utility business, so you can kind of see where it is sort of heading. So to give you an idea, again, some of my data is a bit dated. So as of 5 years ago, let's say AT&T in the US has about 38,000 towers in the US providing service of those mobile towers that we mentioned. And some of them, they don't, in populated cities, they don't need a tower because there's so much density. So the cell phone base station, because it could only serve a few hundred meters, like in places like New York City, might be inside a building. But basically there's 38,000 base stations, or they call them radio access networks, connecting to the hundreds of millions of phones. In comparison, I think Safaricom now has about 7,000 of them in Kenya. Airtel Uganda, I think, has some about sort of 2,000, 2,500 of them. To give you an idea, China Mobile, which is the largest mobile operator in China, and has 800 million subscribers, has 2.5 million base stations.
Oh wow!
So now I think that gives you kind of the gamut, if you would, from top to bottom. Now in the U.S. And China, they have about 80% of those towers. 75 to 80% of their towers connected on fiber. So that's a number that the operators started fiber deployment since about maybe the early 2000s, and in the very early 2000s it might just be a few hubs that might be connected on fiber. Then they started connecting more and more of their mobile cell phone towers on fiber, and that number has increased. I think Safaricom in Kenya is about, both Safaricom and the mobile operators like Vodacom and MTN in South Africa are now at a stage of around 65 to 70% of their base stations
on fiber.
All right. And that's really driven by the fact that when you start getting into more rural areas, the traffic volume is not there, so you need fiber to do the transmission part. So the transmission part might still be in wireless radio, but every year they're fiberizing more and more of their towers and connecting more and more of the towers, and that number got up there. And to give you a stage of that growth, for the South African operators and Safaricom in Kenya, when we started the business in 2010, it might only be 5% of their fiber of their towers on fiber, and now that number has grown to about 70 to 80%. And
so looking at that 5G, if 5G is the future, and that's where the growth is from a connectivity perspective. And I like your China Mobile example, because we should be looking at Africa as a whole as borderless anyway, right? And you guys are literally borderless, right? There's yes, of course, regulatory, you have to go from country to country, but the network works whether there's a border or not, right?
Yes.
What are the three things you seeing in the future, let's say 2050 on the continent? We have the African Free Trade Agreement that's is trying to, from a trade perspective, destroy the barriers. But I see your kind of business as kind of that first connectivity point that is not fiber outside of on the sea, but inland. So, what are the kind of things, what are the three things you're saying, like if I look into the future, this is from a BCS perspective, what are the things that you're going to actually see for your business?
Yeah. I think it makes, where we have to take a cut at, we have to have a clear view of where the industry is going.
Okay.
And the network is going, so that we identify the role that we want to play within that industry. And it's also not just a function of where the industry is going, but it's also a function of where the capital markets are going. How do the capital markets want to see the industry structured and then rewarded in terms of funding, evaluations, and so forth. We believe in that, as you know, Facebook has renamed itself Meta,
Yeah.
because they see a future of a metaverse.
Yeah.
So we don't know whether or not that future will realize itself in 5 years, or it might take up to 2050, like you said, to be realized. But it is definitely completely coming there. For anyone who's never tried it, I just bought myself an Oculus, which is made by Facebook, virtual reality gear, which, by the way, only costs $300, 1/3 of the price of some phones. I have no idea. Now, the whole interactiveness of it and the way it works is absolutely crazy, because as far as what you see and perceive with your eyes, and as far as what you hear with your ear, that virtual reality gear literally mimics reality one-to-one. What you see in that digital world and what you hear when you put on the gear is the same as the way I'm seeing you now, or the way we see the regular reality environment. The only thing that it is missing from sort of reality, I would say, is the other 3 senses, meaning the touch, right?
But it's getting
The
there.
smell.
I mean, I've
Understood.
seen,
The smell and the taste, right? But we only have 5 senses, so it really knocks off as far as the 2 is concerned. So obviously that world is a lot more convenient than having to travel somewhere in order to do this podcast, or in order to go to school, or in order to go get healthcare, in order to have entertainment. The roller coaster on it feels like going to a regular roller coaster at an amusement park. So it's as if you're at Disneyland, but you're not there. So we definitely see that future growing, and really becoming core to how we go through day-to-day activities in society. In order to support it, with the growth of 5G and eventually 6G and so forth, it's important that the connectivity, we see that the last mile access networks will have that connectivity be on wireless to the extent possible, down to from the mobile tower down to the device. Either it's the phone, but what actually is really going to require a huge amount of bandwidth is not even just the smartphones. It's actually when you have
the device
millions of people going around with the device on, they're going to need even more connectivity. Now, it is, I would say, it is to be determined whether or not the wireless access networks will keep on keeping up in terms of the amount of bandwidth they can provide wirelessly for the use cases. So far, they're doing very well, in the sense that, even the 5G network that is going to start being introduced in Africa will start being supported on that. Now, on our side, we see our world where we are increasingly helping the operators connect all of their towers on fiber, where we're doing a lot of innovative work right now in Congo, and in a country with no highways. So we're using the railroad and the rivers and lakes that are navigable in order to lay fiber. And there, the fiberization rate on the towers is at about 2%. So we expect to push that up, and similar stats in Angola as far as at least some of the operators are concerned. And we see ourselves helping connect more and more of the towers in very difficult to reach countries on fiber. Then we're also currently evaluating, and there are very early stages, to see if we can provide that 5G network on a wholesale basis. So that the network that goes from the cell phone tower down to the end user device is also our infrastructure the mobile operators are leasing and providing service to the end user. The end user still would not be able to see us. They would still see Vodacom or Airtel or MTN or Safaricom, depending on the country, or Orange. But it's actually a shared wireless network that is switching across different ones. Yeah.
Cool. I think for me, what's been interesting about your journey is that we all know, we've gone from, Nokia 3310s, to the latest smartphones, and obviously now even to the VR devices, and the amount of internet devices in our households is growing. But that's in a kind of middle class city backdrop, right? But what you're saying is that actually is extending out of the city, and you give a very good example in terms of the Congo. In that number 2% sits with me, because now I'm like, well, that's 80 million people, right?
Yeah.
And so that density needs to come into play, especially when you're talking about 5G. Bringing that connectivity, I think, is going to be something else. And congrats to you and your team on building that, because that's the basis, that's the foundation of a connected economy.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for the time, Yonas. I know that we could go deep into actually the fiber construction business as well, because what you're talking about, road construction versus fiber construction, and the fights that you've had there, and I'm sure there's going to be more fights when you start getting into developing countries like the Congo and so forth. So we'll probably have you back here again.
All right. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the audience. Thank you to Move Better, Move Money across 42 African countries.
Thank you.